Here is something that is happening quietly in the background of American economic policy, but it is rarely discussed in full detail in public conversations. In Illinois, a very small portion of taxpayers is responsible for a very large share of the entire state income tax revenue. Roughly 6% of tax filers generate nearly 40% of all personal income tax collected by the state. On paper, this might appear like a normal outcome in a system where income distribution is uneven. But the real issue is not the concentration of income. The real issue is what is happening to that concentrated group over time. Because over the last decade, a slow and consistent movement has been taking place. The highest earners in the state, business owners, corporate executives, investors, and highly mobile professionals, have been gradually leaving Illinois. Not in one sudden collapse, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a continuous and steady flow that becomes more visible only when viewed over long periods of time. And when you zoom out far enough, the direction becomes difficult to ignore. Economic change does not always announce itself loudly. It often begins in a way that looks completely normal. A company opens a smaller office in another state. A senior executive quietly changes residency. A business expands operations outside its original headquarters location. A division is gradually moved to reduce costs. Individually, none of these actions appear alarming. But when these actions repeat over years, they begin to form a pattern. Illinois has been experiencing this type of pattern for a long time, and the reason behind it is not mysterious. It is structural economics. When the cost of operating in one location becomes significantly higher than alternative locations, businesses naturally begin to evaluate those alternatives, not emotionally, not politically, but mathematically. To understand this movement, you have to understand how corporations actually make decisions. Companies do not operate based on loyalty to a city or a state. They operate based on efficiency and long-term cost optimization. Every major corporation constantly evaluates a set of key factors: total tax burden, labor costs, regulatory complexity, infrastructure, quality, long-term economic stability, financial flexibility. These factors are continuously compared across different regions. And when another state begins to consistently offer better conditions, relocation becomes a logical consideration. Importantly, this process is not sudden. It is gradual. First comes internal analysis. Then comes cost modeling. Then comes long-term planning. Then finally execution. By the time the public hears about a company moving, the decision has often already been internally confirmed months or even years earlier. Corporate relocation is not driven by a single factor. It is usually a combination of multiple pressures building up over time. Even a small difference in tax structure can create a significant long-term cost gap when scaled across thousands of employees, multiple facilities, long operational timelines. In such environments, companies continuously reassess their geographic footprint, and if another state offers lower cost base, simpler regulations, better financial incentives, stronger expansion opportunities, then the balance slowly begins to shift. This shift does not happen instantly. It accumulates. Now let's return to the central financial structure. 6% of taxpayers contributing around 40% of total income tax revenue. This creates a highly concentrated fiscal dependency and dependency introduces sensitivity. Because when a small group funds a large portion of the system, the stability of that system depends heavily on retaining that group. However, the same group also has the highest level of mobility. They can relocate more easily than average earners. They have access to financial flexibility. They can adjust residency, business operations, and investment structures with relative speed. So, structural tension emerges. The state becomes dependent on a group that is also the most capable of leaving. That is not just a political issue. It is an economic design challenge. This structural issue is reflected in long-term population trends. Over the past 2 decades, Illinois has experienced net population decline. Billions of residents have left the state during that time, and surveys consistently show that a large portion of remaining residents have considered leaving as well. The reasons repeatedly include high cost of living tax, burden concerns, better opportunities elsewhere. But what matters more than past movement is current intention. Because intention is what becomes future migration, and future migration is what shapes long-term economic direction. Economic systems are ultimately driven by incentives. When incentives change, behavior changes. If a location becomes more expensive to operate in, companies adjust. If a region becomes more costly for individuals, they consider alternatives. If another state offers better long-term financial conditions, it attracts movement. Illinois has experienced a combination of relatively high tax burden, slower growth compared to national average, ongoing corporate relocations. When these factors persist together, they begin influencing decision-making across multiple levels of the economy. Not immediately, but consistently over time. Corporate relocation rarely happens as a single dramatic announcement. It usually appears as a series of small steps. Satellite offices, opening elsewhere, distribution centers, relocating executive teams, restructuring headquarters functions, shifting gradually. Each step reduces operational friction, and each step makes the next one easier. This is how relocation momentum builds. In today's economic environment, states compete with each other in similar ways that companies compete in markets. Some states prioritize lower taxes, faster approvals, business incentives. Others maintain higher tax structures to support broader public spending models. But businesses compare these environments constantly, and even small differences become significant at scale. Over time, capital tends to concentrate in environments where costs are lower, processes are simpler, expansion is easier. This creates regional clustering of economic activity. The most important aspect of this trend is not individual company movement, it is the direction of movement. Because when economic activity consistently flows in one direction over time, it creates compounding effects. Suppliers follow businesses, talent follows jobs, investment follows growth. And once these cycles begin reinforcing each other, they become difficult to reverse quickly. To understand the real impact of this trend, you have to look at the pattern of corporate movement over time, not just individual headlines. Over the past several years, a growing number of companies have either relocated headquarters, moved major operations, or shifted key divisions out of Illinois. Each case on its own looks like a standard business decision, but when placed together, they form a directional map of economic migration. Some companies move to reduce tax exposure. Some move to lower operational costs.
Some move for regulatory flexibility, and some move simply to align with long-term growth regions. But the outcome is the same. Capital moves toward efficiency and away from friction. Once a company leaves a state, the impact is not limited to that single relocation, because every company is part of a larger ecosystem. When a business relocates, it takes with it internal employees, vendor contracts, supply chain dependencies, service providers, and future investment plans. But even more important is the signal it sends. Other companies observe that decision. They reassess their own risk models. They update their assumptions about the state's long-term business environment. And slowly, relocation becomes more normalized, not as an exception, but as an option. That shift in perception is one of the most powerful economic forces. Economic migration does not happen in straight lines. It compounds. One departure increases visibility. Visibility influences perception. Perception influences future decisions. Future decisions reinforce the trend. This creates a feedback loop. And once a feedback loop begins in economics, it tends to accelerate over time unless actively corrected. That is why early-stage trends are so important, because they define the trajectory of the next decade, not just the current year. While Illinois has been experiencing outflow, other states have been positioning themselves to attract incoming capital. States like Texas, Florida, and Kansas have consistently offered lower corporate tax structures, more flexible regulatory environments, lower cost of living, and operations targeted business incentives. These factors create a competitive advantage. And in a mobile economy, even small advantages accumulate over time. As companies relocate, they do not just move offices, they move ecosystems. That includes suppliers, logistics networks, talent pools, and future investment cycles. This is how regional economic hubs strengthen. When companies leave, the impact is not only at the corporate level, it spreads through the local economy, because corporate headquarters and large operations support local employment office, leasing markets, transportation services, restaurants and retail activity, philanthropic funding, professional service industries. When those anchor institutions move, the ripple effect is broad. Even businesses not directly connected to the departing company feel the impact over time. This is why corporate relocation is never isolated. It is structural. Now return to the original structural issue. 60% of taxpayers generating nearly 40% of income tax revenue. As high-income individuals leave, the remaining tax base becomes more dependent on those who stay. This can create a pressure cycle. Fewer high earners remain. Revenue concentration increases. Fiscal pressure rises. Policy adjustments become more difficult. And this cycle, once established, is difficult to break without significant structural change, because the system becomes sensitive to even small changes in its highest contributors. While corporate relocation is one side of the story, individual migration is the other. People do not always leave because of one single factor. It is usually a combination of financial pressure, tax burden, perception, lifestyle, comparison with other states, long-term opportunity, evaluation. And importantly, migration decisions are often delayed until a tipping point is reached. But once that point is reached, movement becomes rational, not emotional, economic. When you combine corporate exits, population decline, high tax concentration, slower relative growth, and competitive pressure from other states, you begin to see a long-term trajectory forming, not a sudden collapse, not an immediate crisis, but a gradual redistribution of economic activity across regions. This is how modern economies evolve, through continuous adjustment, not single events. At the center of this entire discussion is one fundamental question: what conditions must exist for high-income individuals and major corporations to consistently choose to stay rather than leave? Because in competitive economics, retention is as important as attraction. Attraction brings growth. Retention stabilizes it. And when retention weakens, even strong attraction may not fully compensate. From a distance, these trends may look like separate stories. A company moving here, a family relocating there, a budget adjustment in Springfield, a policy discussion in state government. But when viewed together, they form a single pattern. Economic activity is gradually adjusting to perceived cost and opportunity differences across regions. And in that adjustment, some regions gain, while others lose relative positioning over time. Illinois, in this case, represents a system undergoing long-term recalibration, not because of one decision, but because of many small decisions accumulating over time. In economics, the most important signals are rarely dramatic. They are consistent. When businesses repeatedly evaluate alternatives, when individuals continuously consider relocation, and when tax structure becomes increasingly concentrated, the system is already speaking, not through announcements, but through behavior. And behavior, over time, becomes direction.